In 1939, J.R.R. Tolkien wrote, in response to the criticism that fantasy writing is nothing but escapism, "It is akin to the soldier's duty to escape imprisonment." In 1979, Ursula K. Le Guin referenced that passage from Tolkien's essay and expanded on it. "The moneylenders, the know-nothings, the authoritarians have us all in prison. If we value the freedom of mind and soul, then it is our plain duty to escape and take as many people with us as we can." Let's talk about that. Welcome to Independent Infinities, where we discuss multifarious aspects of the art of game mastering. My name is Gene. At more than one time in my elementary and middle school years, I encountered a teacher who vehemently insisted that I spent too much time reading, particularly fantasy and science fiction. And now I'm a professional writer and information architect, and I've been DMing for 49 years. D&D, like all role-playing games, is a wonderful way to imagine a different life. There are many, dare I say, infinitely many, possibilities to imagine. You pretend to be someone else in a world where individual heroes can literally save the world. You share adventures with your friends, whether they be friends you had before discovering the game or people you met because of the game and forged a friendship after. There are lots of videos out there about how Dungeons & Dragons in particular, and or role-playing in general, changed someone's life for the better. Some go as far as to say it saved their life. Others refer to the therapeutic benefits that they received from this amazing hobby of ours. The videos can be quite emotional to watch. I understand that feeling. I mentioned above about teachers in school who singled me out because of how much I read for fun, and particularly how much of what I read was fantasy and science fiction. They thought that all of the time I spent in imaginary worlds was why I didn't conform to some of their expectations of a boy my age. One of those teachers kept bringing it up, trying different arguments to convince me to stop reading those kinds of books. She was particularly upset when I once expressed disappointment in many of the fantasy novels from a category often called portal fantasy, where an ordinary kid or group of kids were whisked off to an imaginary world, to a magical world, had adventures, helped save the world, and then they had to go back home and go back to being ordinary. To which she responded, "But if you really went off to such a place having to fight monsters and such, you'd start missing home pretty quickly. Wouldn't you rather live here where there are no monsters?" I didn't feel safe telling her that there definitely are monsters living in our world. Having a physically abusive father, whose beatings sent myself and each of my younger siblings to emergency rooms on more than one occasion, I was very aware that monsters are real and right here. If I were trapped in another world, of course there would be people I missed, but the part of the ending of all of those portal fantasy novels that really disappointed me was that the kids couldn't bring any of the magic back. If going to a fantasy world gave me powers to defeat monsters there, surely I should be able to bring those things back and save myself, my mom, and my younger siblings from the monster I was forced to live with day in and day out. The things about me that made some teachers and other adults in my life insist I needed to change and become more like normal boys didn't come from my reading of fantasy or science fiction. My undiagnosed ADHD caused some of it. Also, like many kids whose intelligence is more than 2 standard deviations above average, a lot of the time in school I was bored. Lack of challenging work plus ADHD was not conducive to sitting quietly and listening with all of my attention on the teacher all the time. My dad being employed in the petroleum industry meant we moved whenever a job was done, and the rig he worked on was sent to a new work site. That's why my grammar school years were spread across 10 different elementary schools in 4 different states. That alone likely explained why I always felt more at home in a library than anywhere else. Every school library collection was a bit different, just as every public library's collection varied from others. But they all used the Dewey Decimal System, so I could learn to navigate each new library quickly. Throw in me being queer on top of all the other things, well, I was never going to fit in with most kids in any of those schools. Science fiction and fantasy saved my life. After my parents divorced and we moved 1,200 miles away from my dad, it was among sci-fi and fantasy nerds in our new home where I found the world of wargaming, and from there, the amazing hobby of D&D. There have been many studies which show scientifically that through role-playing games, kids and young adults, particularly any of us who were not neurotypical or who didn't conform in other ways, can learn or vastly improve social skills. People of all ages who feel that they don't belong can find communities that welcome them through RPG activities. Role-playing games have been shown to help some folks develop empathy for people unlike themselves. Role-playing games can help in their individual journeys of self-discovery. It is that last bit which is so misunderstood by many people. Role-playing about being someone else almost inevitably leads to one learning more about themselves. Neuroscientists tell us that dreaming is an important part of the process of learning. Our subconscious puts together imaginary situations and compares them to memories of events we've participated in while awake. Neuroscientists also tell us that when we are awake and imagine events that have never occurred in our real life, whether they be from reading a book, watching a movie, or role-playing out in adventures in a role-playing game, our brain processes all of that exactly the same as when we experience things in real life. On many levels, our brains don't know the difference between an imaginary adventure and something that happens to us in the real world. Interacting with NPCs and the characters of our fellow players in the game exercises many skills. That feeling of accomplishment you have when your party overcomes a particularly troublesome opponent is a real feeling. Our characters are not us, but they contain part of us. When we create a character and imagine how they will feel and react in the situations in a game, we are really imagining ourselves. How would I feel if I lived in this world and encountered this person? What kind of person might I become if I was in that world and grew up in those circumstances rather than what my real life was like? Brennan Lee Mulligan has a nice metaphor for characters we play in RPGs. He likens the characters to an elaborate stained glass window. The light that shines through the different colored pieces of glass, as well as the light which is blocked by the opaque wall around the glass, and the trimmings of lead in the window, is us. We provide the spark. Our characters may have abilities we don't, and much of their personality may be very different from us, but in the moment when we are playing them, the emotions and reactions are coming from us. One of the objectives of RPGs is to imagine what it would be like to go on the kinds of adventures that happen in those games. Sometimes our characters give us a chance, whether we meant to or not, to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Other times we get to save the day and make the imaginary world a better place, in a manner far more satisfying than the small victories most of us are limited to in our real lives. No matter how different from ourselves your character is, you are the one making the decisions of how they react to any given situation. Any feeling the character is having about their situation is coming from you. Some of us look back on our lives and can see how fantasy in general and D&D in particular changed us for the better. It gave us a place to practice being bolder than we felt in real life. It gave us a place to try being a different kind of person than our parents or teachers or religious leaders or peers expected us to be. It helped us find the courage to be ourselves unapologetically. Be yourself, because no one else sees the world quite the way you do. Never shrink your zeal, your joys, or your eccentricities to fit into someone else's narrow expectations. And that's where we'll leave it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please click the thumbs up button and/or consider sharing. Click subscribe to be notified when new videos are uploaded. If you have any thoughts on this topic, leave them in the comments below. Until next time, keep dreaming.